Most people, when they play Among Us, they desire the imposter role, whether that be Shapeshifter, Viper, or even Phantom. Me, however, I enjoy a good old engineer role, due to the fact that you can not only hide in events, but also catch imposters, as you'll soon see in this video. Now, they began like any other. Instead of doing my task like a good crewmate, I immediately just ran into event to hide as I waited for imposters to show themselves. Now, after searching around the events, trying to wait for an imposter to make a kill, I eventually came out as I needed to cool down my ability. After coming out the event, I'd been trapped in, trapped in the medbay hallway with Cyan for a bit. Orange called an emergency meeting. The reason for this meeting was that Orange said he saw two people came outside. Because he saw three people came outside when there was two people in medbay. That third person most likely being me. However, now in this instance, I could easily just say I was an engineer inventing, but the problem is when you kind of confess you're an engineer, people have a habit of killing you and not believing you because they think that you might be the imposter and lying about an engineer role. Engineers don't last long when they kind of admit. So because of that, I kind of stayed silent about my role and didn't say anything until someone said I was, until someone said I was suspicious. Which I know it makes me more suspicious waiting until someone accuses me, but it's better. But I have a better chance of just admitting I'm an engineer, to be honest, because again, people just have a habit of killing engineers and voting them off because they think they're lying. The only way I'd reveal I'm an engineer if I had an imposter to basically, to basically out. That way, I have at least have proof that I'm innocent. Because again, if I reveal I'm an engineer and I get an imposter out, people will know that yeah, I'm definitely an engineer then. Because of that, I stayed silent. Now because Orange didn't really have anyone to accuse of coming out of the medbay, the vote was most likely skipped, and no one was ejected. After the vote was skipped, me and a few other crewmates came out the medbay to watch Green do a scan, but there was kind of a bit of a problem. You see, in this server, the settings for the visual scans was kind of turned off. So instead of seeing a green scan around the line, we saw him just standing there doing nothing. Which, to be honest, wasn't really, it's not exactly proof, because, if he was an imposter, he could probably do some good acting just standing there, since we couldn't see the visual. However, despite that, I decided to leave medbay, head out to the cameras to check the vents for any killers. However, as I was heading to a vent, I saw Cyan vented out. Now, usually people could say that Cyan was also an engineer, but you see, in this server, there's also only one engineer role, and me being the only engineer, pretty much makes me come to the conclusion that Cyan is the imposter. So, however, before I could get to the emergency meeting, Blue did that for me. And during the emergency meeting, I decided to vote. I decided to tell everyone that I saw Cyan vent and finally revealed that I'm an engineer. However, despite me, saying that Cyan vented, we kind of didn't get anyone, as there was a three-way tie, as there was a two-way tie between Cyan and Gray, because since people suspected that Gray was also an imposter. So because of that, the vote kind of went nowhere. Now, however, instead of just being satisfied with this, I decided to call an emergency meeting to again out Cyan and get him out. Because again, I know for certain that Cyan is the imposter, and we need to get rid of someone. We do need to get rid of the monster. So, trying once again to appease the masses, I said Cyan vented and vote for Cyan. However, things did went pretty smoothly as people kind of trusted my my accusation. I also inform people I'm an engineer again, so that way people know that I have more solid proof. After a very long time, the votes finally came in, and as hoped, Cyan was booted out, and revealed that he was the imposter. Not only clearing me of being innocent, but also getting rid of having one less monster in the ship, and person traveling around in my events. After all, these events are only meant for one person. That's me. After waiting the fence and coming out of electrical, Purple called him. What was it? Purple? Gray called an emergency meeting. Gray called an emergency meeting and claimed it was Orange. Asking why and wishing for proof. I was kind of hesitant at first. However, Gray said they claimed that he transported him. But during this one accusation, Purple said that he saw me vent and saying that I was an engineer. Forgetting that, just earlier I kind of, got rid of Cyan and also claimed I was an engineer. So answering Purple's question and assuring him, I told him that I'm an engineer and that I got Cyan out. However, trusting Gray's logic, I decided to vote on Orange to see if it was true. Because again, Gray did claim that Orange did poof in front of him, which is is sort of evidence. I know Orange did vouch for me to get rid of Cyan, but again, he could have just been an imposter, just trying to buy some luck. Sadly, though, we were all wrong, as Orange was actually innocent. Now, immediately after, Lime decided to call for another emergency meeting, saying that it's Gray. Now, following Orange's last words, I decided to say that, following Orange's last words saying that it was Coral, I decided to tell everyone else that, that Coral might be the monster, considering that Orange said it was and he was innocent. However, Lime said it was Gray. Trusting Lime's logic, I decided to go for Gray again. I decided to go for Gray to see if he was true. Sadly, he was not. And we still have 2 imposters left. Now, getting back to my engineer duties, I decided to go back to the fence to search for more imposters instead of, doing my task like a good crewmate. However, I was an engineer. A certain body turned up. Coral was dead, one of my suspects. So, turned out that Orange was kind of raw in there too. And we were... Now during the emergency meeting, me and Blue just pointed out that Green would kind of lied about saying that he saw Gray, even though Gray did claim, since Gray claimed that he saw, since Lime did claim that Gray, was a traitor and he was an imposter and he was certain of it. However, when Blue asked, Lime why he lied, he just says, "I don't know." A very valid response, I guess. However, going with my gut feeling, I decided to lean more towards, voting for Maroon. Since, Lime said that it was Maroon. Lime keeps claiming that it's Maroon. With no real unity of who to vote for, it was a two-way tie between Lime and also Maroon. So because of that, no one was ejected. Now, desiring to check other fields, I decided to look through both defensive weapons and also the piloting room to see if the killer would strike there. However, no one really even came, so it was actually just a waste of time. I decided to head back to the medbay area to check the three main vents, as imposters do tend to love to kill in medbay and engineer and electric. However, as I was checking the medbay area, I saw a certain person popping out of the vents. Yeah, that is Rose you see there. Now, instead of immediately coming out of the vents and trying to rush to the meeting room, I decided to wait a bit to see if Rose passed by. However, as I tried to, call an emergency meeting, there was kind of an issue. I ran out of emergency meeting passes, call for one, because I used mine at Cyan. So because of that, I really couldn't call an emergency meeting to say it was Rose. So the best thing I had to do was wait until a dead body showed up. So instead of risking dying, I decided to wait in the vents until, someone would report a dead body or call an emergency meeting. After waiting for a bit, Lime turned out dead. So at least we knew it wasn't him this time. However, as people were talking about where Lime's body was, I made the statement that I saw Rose vented. However, as I claimed it was Rose, people said that Blue said there were shapeshifters about, and that we couldn't exactly trust what color we saw doing an evil task. However, we had to vote for someone as the number of crewmates was dwindling down. So I persisted that we go for Rose. Thankfully, people went for my statement and decided to vote for Rose. Since I was the one that got Cyan out. With only one imposter left, things were starting to look up for us, as all we need to do is find the last person. And knowing and suspecting who it was, my guess is either Maroon and Red. However, again, I couldn't call for emergency meetings since, I ran out of those. So buying my time, I waited in the vents until one of my suspects striked, or at least a dead body showed up. During my wait, one of the monsters activated reactor meltdown, and we had to immediately go over there to see what it was. However, we easily fixed that, and all was good. However, as I was leaving, someone decided to lock me into a medbay room, all alone, most likely trying to make me look suspicious. Purple decided to call an emergency meeting, which now gave me the chance to point out, which felt like it was the chance to vote for who the last imposter is. However, Purple wasn't trying to go for. However, Purple didn't call the emergency meeting to go out to Red or Maroon. He tried calling the emergency meeting to out to me, even though again I proved myself not only once but also twice. Kind of forgot that I was the one that got both Cyan and Rose. However, despite Purple's belief, me and the remaining crewmates decided to vote for Red as he's one of the suspects. However, Red claimed that he did a scan, people were watching him, and even though he did sort of do a scan, again, there's no visual, so we couldn't exactly see the scan. So for all we know, he could have been an imposter, just like stood there perfectly well. So because of that, we kind of voted for Red out and attempted to get the last imposter gone. Sadly, we were wrong. However, despite us being wrong, this only lead to basically one suspect left, Maroon. Now the reason why was because I know blue and Purple are innocent, considering that these two spent a lot of time together and none of them really did a strike on each other. They pretty much just stood next to each other, not harming one another. However, the problem is we couldn't exactly call for an emergency meeting due to the fact that none of us had any things left. So the only way to get another meeting is for someone to die. Not wishing to be the one killed, I hid in the vents while people ran around in circles waiting for Maroon to finally make a strike. After a very long standoff, the imposter decided to complete the oxygen to get us to move and separate. However, not wishing to be alone with Maroon, I went with Purple and Blue to basically get the oxygen fixed. However, as we ran into the second one to get the oxygen fixed, I saw a certain clone running about. That most likely being Maroon disguised as me to frame me. However, I couldn't make a report, so instead I just went to find Blue. However, as Blue and I were heading back to the cafeteria, we saw Purple has been murdered. Most definitely by Maroon. Now, even though it is sad that we lost Purple, it was kind of a relief that it was Purple instead of Blue, because for some reason Purple, again, was very suspicious and more likely to vote for me, even though, again, I ousted 2 imposters. I guess he probably forgot about that. However, as I thought this was an easy win, Blue was kind of hesitant. Again, even though I got both Cyan and Rose, Blue still didn't know who to really trust, and kind of forgot that I, again, got rid of both Rose and Cyan. However, pointing out that I got both Cyan and Rose out and kept pushing for Blue to vote for Maroon, Blue finally decided to give in and listen to what I was saying, and sided with me against Maroon. As Maroon floated in space, we saw we were right. And we won the game. Now, sure, about 13 crewmates died, and only 2 survived, which was not, ideal. However, we still won, even, despite the huge losses. So, that's a win for us.